The autumn evening air carried a crisp bite as guests arrived at the Royal Opera House for the annual charity gala supporting the Prince's Trust. Among the distinguished attendees, two figures would soon find themselves in an unexpectedly delightful conversation that would reveal the human side of royalty and the timeless appeal of British comedy. Prince William, now the Prince of Wales, moved through the reception area with the practiced ease of someone who had attended countless such events. His navy suit was impeccably tailored, and his warm smile genuine as he greeted supporters and fellow patrons of the arts. At 41, William had grown into his role as a senior member of the royal family, balancing the weight of duty with moments of authentic connection. Across the room, John Cleese stood near the champagne reception, his towering 6'5" frame making him easily recognizable even in a crowd of notable personalities. At 84, the comedy legend retained the sharp wit and observational humor that had made him a household name through Monty Python's Flying Circus and Fawlty Towers. His presence at the gala reflected his long-standing support for various charitable causes, particularly those involving education and the arts. The two men had met briefly on previous occasions, exchanging pleasantries at official functions and public events. However, this evening would prove different. As the formal reception began to wind down and guests moved toward the main auditorium, fate intervened in the form of a delayed performance that left attendees with an additional 30 minutes of mingling time. William found himself gravitating toward a quieter corner of the reception area, seeking a moment's respite from the constant stream of introductions and conversations. It was there that he encountered Cleese, who was examining a display of photographs showcasing the Prince's Trust's work with young people over the decades. "Remarkable work you're doing with these programs," Cleese commented as William approached. His voice carried the distinctive tone that had brought Basil Fawlty to life, though now it was filled with genuine admiration rather than manic frustration. "Thank you, John. It means a great deal coming from you," William replied, his formal training evident in his respectful address. "Your own work has brought so much joy to people over the years. I have to say your comedy has had quite an impact in our household." Cleese raised an eyebrow, intrigued. In his long career, he had met numerous celebrities and public figures who claimed to be fans, but there was something in William's tone that suggested a more personal connection than mere politeness. "Oh, I hope it's been a positive influence," Cleese said with characteristic dry humor. "Though given some of my characters, I'm not entirely sure that's guaranteed." William's laugh was spontaneous and unguarded, a sound rarely heard in such formal settings. "Actually, I was thinking specifically of Fawlty Towers. My children have discovered it recently, and I have to say, their reaction has been absolutely wonderful to watch." The comment caught Cleese off guard. While Fawlty Towers had achieved cult status and continued to find new audiences decades after its original run, the idea that the future king's children were among its contemporary fans was both surprising and deeply satisfying. "Really, how old are they now?" Cleese asked, his curiosity genuinely piqued. "George is 10, Charlotte's 8, and Louis is 5, William replied, his voice taking on the warm tone that always accompanied mentions of his children. "George and Charlotte are the ones who have really taken to it. Louis is still a bit young for some of the humor, though he laughs along with his siblings." Cleese nodded thoughtfully. The ages were perfect for discovering the physical comedy and character-based humor that made Fawlty Towers accessible across generations. The show's blend of sophisticated wit and slapstick elements had always appealed to both children and adults, though for different reasons. "How did they discover it?" Cleese inquired. "I imagine you have quite a selection of entertainment options available." William smiled, remembering the evening that had started it all. "Actually, it was during one of our family movie nights. Catherine and I were trying to find something we could all watch together, and I remembered how much I had enjoyed the show when I was younger. We thought we'd try the first episode and see how it went." The memory was vivid in William's mind. It had been a rainy Sunday evening at Kensington Palace, and the family had gathered in their private sitting room. The children had been restless after a day indoors, and Catherine had suggested they watch something together as a family. The usual options of animated films and children's programs had been exhausted, and William had impulsively suggested Fawlty Towers, remembering his own introduction to the show years earlier. "The reaction was immediate," William continued, his eyes lighting up with paternal pride. "From the moment Basil appeared on screen, they were captivated. Charlotte, in particular, found the way Basil talks to himself absolutely hilarious. Cleese couldn't help but smile at this revelation. The character of Basil Fawlty, with his manic energy and tendency toward elaborate monologues, had always been popular with younger audiences. The physical comedy and exaggerated reactions translated well across age groups, even if some of the subtler adult humor went over children's heads. "And George?" Cleese asked, interested in how each child had responded differently to the show. "George has become fascinated with the whole premise," William explained. "He keeps asking questions about how hotels work, why Basil gets so frustrated with the guests, and whether real hotel managers behave like that. It sparked quite a few interesting conversations about customer service and patience." The idea that Fawlty Towers was providing educational content for a future king was both amusing and oddly appropriate. The show's exploration of class dynamics, social expectations, and professional relationships, while exaggerated for comic effect, did touch on real aspects of British society and business culture. "Has Catherine joined in their appreciation?" Cleese asked, knowing that the Princess of Wales had her own dry sense of humor. "Oh, absolutely," William said with obvious affection. "She actually quotes Basil more than the children do now. Just yesterday, when dealing with a particularly difficult scheduling conflict, she muttered, 'Don't mention the war,' under her breath. I nearly burst out laughing during what was supposed to be a serious planning meeting." Cleese threw back his head and laughed, delighted by the image of the elegant Princess of Wales invoking one of Basil Fawlty's most famous lines in the midst of royal duties. The idea that his creation had become part of the domestic vocabulary of the Wales family was both surreal and deeply satisfying. "I have to ask," William continued, leaning in slightly as if sharing a confidence, "the children have been debating which episodes are the funniest. George insists it's the Germans, while Charlotte is devoted to the hotel inspectors. They've been trying to convince Louis that he's old enough to understand why Basil hiding the duck is so funny." The specificity of their preferences impressed Cleese. These weren't casual viewers who had caught a few clips online. They were genuine fans who had watched enough episodes to develop personal favorites and engage in detailed discussions about the content. "Those are excellent choices," Cleese replied thoughtfully. "The German episode tends to be popular with younger viewers because of the physical comedy, while the Hotel Inspector episode has more subtle humor that appeals to slightly older children." "Exactly what Catherine and I thought," William agreed. "Though I have to admit, watching them discover comedy that meant so much to me at their age has been rather special. It's created this wonderful shared reference point for our family." The conversation was interrupted briefly as other guests approached, requiring the customary exchanges of greetings and small talk. However, both men were clearly enjoying their discussion and naturally drifted back together as the interruptions subsided. "I hope you don't mind me asking," William said when they were alone again, "but how does it feel to know that your work is still bringing families together decades later? The children treat watching Fawlty Towers like a special event. They'll actually negotiate extra chores for the privilege of staying up to watch an episode." Cleese was touched by the question and the sentiment behind it. In his long career, he had received countless accolades and awards, but hearing that his work was creating positive family moments for the next generation of the royal family was uniquely meaningful. "It's incredibly gratifying," Cleese replied honestly. "When we were making those shows, we hoped they would be funny and perhaps make people's lives a little brighter. To know that they're still doing that, especially for young people who weren't even born when they were made, is really quite wonderful." William nodded, understanding the deeper significance of entertainment that transcends generations. "The children have actually started incorporating Basil's expressions into their daily conversation. Charlotte has mastered his exasperated, 'Oh, I see,' and uses it whenever she feels her brothers aren't paying proper attention to her explanations." The image of the young Princess Charlotte channeling Basil Fawlty's indignation was both charming and slightly alarming. Cleese could easily picture the 8-year-old delivering the line with the same theatrical frustration that had made it memorable in the original show. "And George," Cleese prompted, sensing there was more to the story. "George has become quite the philosopher about it all," William said with obvious pride. "Last week, he asked me if Basil Fawlty was meant to teach people how not to behave. When I said that was certainly part of it, he nodded very seriously and said he thought comedy was probably a good way to learn about life because it made the lessons less frightening. Cleese was genuinely moved by this observation. The 10-year-old had grasped something about comedy's social function that many adults failed to recognize. The ability to examine human foibles and social problems through humor did indeed make them less threatening and more manageable. "That's remarkably insightful for someone his age," Cleese said. "He's quite right, of course. Comedy has always been a way for societies to examine their problems and contradictions without becoming too overwhelmed by them." "I thought you'd appreciate that perspective," William replied. "Catherine and I have been impressed by how the show has sparked these kinds of conversations with them. It's given us opportunities to talk about things like patience, professionalism, and treating others with respect, all while having a good laugh together." The evening was progressing, and other guests were beginning to move toward the auditorium, but neither man seemed inclined to end their conversation. There was something refreshing about discussing the simple pleasure of family entertainment in a setting usually dominated by more formal topics. "I imagine they must have questions about the historical aspects as well," Cleese suggested. "The show does reflect a particular time and place in British culture." "Oh, they do indeed," William confirmed. George wanted to know if hotels really operated that way in the 1970s and whether guests actually behaved like some of Basil's more difficult customers. It's led to some interesting discussions about how society and service industries have evolved. The conversation had revealed something that neither man had expected when the evening began. What had started as a casual encounter between a royal patron and a veteran entertainer had become a genuine exchange about family, laughter, and the enduring power of well-crafted comedy to bring people together across generations. As they prepared to join the other guests for the main event, both William and Cleese seemed reluctant to let the moment end. There was something special about discovering an unexpected connection, particularly one that involved the simple joy of a family sharing laughter together. "I hope this isn't presumptuous," William said as they began to walk toward the auditorium. "But would you be interested in meeting them sometime? I think George and Charlotte would be absolutely thrilled, and it might give you a chance to see firsthand how your work is being received by the next generation." Cleese was both honored and delighted by the invitation. The opportunity to meet young fans and see their genuine reactions to his work was always rewarding, but the chance to do so with the Wales children, who clearly had developed such a thoughtful appreciation for the show, was particularly appealing. "I would be absolutely delighted," Cleese replied without hesitation. "Though I should warn you, meeting comedy heroes in person can sometimes be disappointing for children. I'm considerably less energetic than Basil Fawlty." William laughed, appreciating both the humor and the humility of the response. "I think they'll manage their expectations. Besides, they're more interested in the creative process than expecting you to perform the characters for them. George has been asking about how comedies are written and whether the actors ever break character during filming." As they entered the auditorium and took their respective seats, both men carried with them the warm glow of an unexpected connection. For William, it had been a chance to share his pride in his children's developing sense of humor and their thoughtful engagement with classic entertainment. For Cleese, it had been a reminder of why he had devoted his career to making people laugh and the profound satisfaction that came from knowing his work continued to create moments of joy for families around the world. The evening's performance was about to begin, but the most memorable part of the event had already taken place in those quiet moments of conversation between two very different men who had discovered a shared appreciation for the simple pleasure of making children laugh. 3 weeks after their conversation at the Royal Opera House, arrangements were quietly made for John Cleese to visit Kensington Palace. The meeting was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon, deliberately chosen to allow for a relaxed, informal atmosphere that would put the children at ease while maintaining appropriate privacy for such an unusual gathering. William had carefully prepared his children for the visit without building expectations so high that they would be overwhelmed. He had explained that the man who had helped create Basil Fawlty would be coming to meet them, emphasizing that John Cleese was a real person with his own personality, quite different from the manic hotel manager they had come to love. "Remember," Catherine had gently reminded the children over breakfast that morning, "Mr. Cleese is our guest, so we should be polite and let him speak without interrupting with too many questions all at once. Charlotte had nodded solemnly, though her eyes sparkled with excitement. Can I ask him if Basil's wife was really that scary, or if it was just pretend? You can ask him about his work, William had replied. But remember that actors and writers often like to talk about how they create characters rather than just repeating the same scenes you've already seen. George, ever the thoughtful one, had been preparing his questions for days. He had even written them down in his neat handwriting, showing a consideration for their guest that made both parents proud. His list included inquiries about the writing process, how they decided which jokes to include, and whether real hotel guests ever behaved as strangely as the ones in the show. Louis, at 5, was perhaps the most excited despite understanding the least about the significance of the visit. He had been told that a funny man who made the shows they watched was coming to see them, and that was quite enough to capture his imagination completely. The palace staff had been briefed to treat the visit as a private family matter rather than an official engagement. There would be no photographers, no formal protocol, and no recorded conversations. This was simply a family welcoming an entertainer who had brought them joy, allowing their children to meet someone whose work they admired. When John Cleese arrived at the appointed time, he was struck by the relative normalcy of the setting. While Kensington Palace was undeniably grand, the family's private apartments had been arranged to feel welcoming rather than intimidating. Comfortable sofas were arranged around a coffee table laden with tea service and what appeared to be homemade biscuits, creating an atmosphere more reminiscent of a friend visiting for afternoon tea than a formal royal audience. William greeted him at the door personally, dispensing with formality in favor of genuine warmth. John, thank you so much for coming. The children have been looking forward to this all week. The pleasure is entirely mine, Cleese replied, meaning it sincerely. I have to admit, I'm quite curious to meet these young critics who have such strong opinions about which episodes are funniest. Catherine appeared moments later, offering her hand with the gracious smile that had made her so popular with the public. Mr. Cleese, welcome to our home. I hope you don't mind that we've kept things rather informal. We thought it would be easier for everyone to relax that way. Please call me John, he responded, immediately putting her at ease. And informal is perfect. I was never very good at formal anyway, as anyone who's watched Basil Fawlty can attest. The children's entrance was carefully orchestrated. George appeared first, having been designated as the official welcoming committee by virtue of his age and natural composure. His handshake was firm, and his "How do you do, Mr. Cleese?" was perfectly executed, though his excitement was evident in the bright flush across his cheeks. Charlotte followed, offering a small curtsy that she had clearly been practicing, before stepping forward with the confidence of someone who had never doubted she would be welcomed anywhere. Mr. Cleese, I'm Charlotte. I think your show is brilliant, and I have some questions about Sybil. Cleese delighted in her directness, recognizing a kindred spirit in her straightforward approach. I'd be happy to answer them, Charlotte. Sybil was quite a character to write for. Louis brought up the rear, slightly shy but determined not to be left out. He managed a whispered hello before attaching himself to his father's side, content to observe from that safe vantage point. As they settled into the comfortable seating arrangement, the conversation began naturally. Cleese found himself genuinely impressed by the children's knowledge of the show and their thoughtful questions about the creative process. Mr. Cleese, George began, consulting his carefully prepared list. When you were writing the episodes, did you always know how Basil would react to things, or did you have to think about it each time? The question demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of character development that pleased Cleese enormously. That's an excellent question, George. When we first created Basil, we spent a lot of time thinking about what kind of person he was and how he would see the world. Once we understood that, his reactions became much more predictable. So he's not just random funny, Charlotte interjected, her natural curiosity overriding her earlier promise not to interrupt. Not at all, Cleese explained patiently. Basil has very specific fears and desires. He wants to be seen as sophisticated and successful, but he's actually quite insecure and doesn't handle stress well. Once you know that about him, you can predict how he'll react to almost any situation. William watched his children's faces as they absorbed this explanation, nodding how they were beginning to understand that good comedy came from character rather than just silly actions. Is that why he gets so upset about small things? George asked, making the connection between Basil's personality and his explosive reactions to minor problems. Exactly right, Cleese confirmed, clearly pleased with George's insight. In Basil's mind, every small problem is a threat to his image of himself as a competent hotel manager. That's why he overreacts so dramatically. Charlotte had been waiting patiently for her turn, and now she seized her opportunity. But what about Sybil? She seems much smarter than Basil, so why does she stay married to him? The question caught both William and Catherine by surprise. It showed a level of analysis they hadn't expected from their 8-year-old, and they were curious to hear how Cleese would handle such a perceptive inquiry. That's a very sophisticated question, Charlotte, Cleese replied thoughtfully. Sybil does see through Basil's pretensions, and she's certainly more practical than he is. I think she stays because underneath all his bluster, Basil isn't really a bad person. He's just complicated. Like people in real life, Charlotte observed with the matter-of-fact wisdom that sometimes emerged from children. Exactly like people in real life, Cleese agreed. The best comedy characters are based on real types of people, just with their traits exaggerated so we can laugh at them. Louis had been listening with the intense concentration of someone trying to understand concepts just slightly beyond his reach. Finally, he spoke up with the directness that only a 5-year-old could manage. Why is it funny when people are frustrated? The question silenced the room for a moment. Even Cleese paused, recognizing that Louis had inadvertently posed one of the fundamental questions about comedy itself. That's a wonderful question, Louis, Cleese said finally. I think it's funny because we've all felt frustrated sometimes, and when we see Basil getting frustrated about silly things, it helps us feel better about our own frustrations. Like when I can't tie my shoes properly and I get cross, Louis asked, seeking to relate the concept to his own experience. Very much like that, Cleese confirmed. Except Basil gets much more cross about much sillier things, which makes it safe for us to laugh. William marveled at how easily Cleese had connected with his youngest son, bringing complex ideas about comedy down to a level Louis could understand without being condescending. The conversation continued to flow naturally, with the children asking about everything from the writing process to the filming locations. Cleese found himself genuinely enjoying their curiosity and the thoughtful way they approached his work. "Did you ever break character while filming?" George asked, returning to his prepared list of questions. "Oh, constantly," Cleese admitted with a laugh. "Especially during the physical comedy scenes. When Basil is trying to discipline his car with a tree branch, I kept bursting into laughter because the whole situation was so absurd." "You hit a car with a tree?" Louis asked, his eyes wide with amazement. "In the show, yes," Cleese explained. "Basil gets so angry with his car that he decides to punish it like it's a naughty child. It's completely illogical, which is what makes it funny." Charlotte giggled at this explanation. "That does sound like something Basil would do. He treats everything like it should behave the way he wants it to." The insight impressed everyone present. Charlotte had identified one of Basil's key character traits: his expectation that the world should conform to his desires rather than accepting that he needed to adapt to circumstances. As the afternoon progressed, the conversation expanded beyond Fawlty Towers to include Cleese's other work and his thoughts about comedy in general. The children were particularly fascinated by his stories about Monty Python, though some of the concepts were clearly beyond their current understanding. "Is it true that you sometimes played women in your shows?" Charlotte asked, having heard her parents mention Python's tradition of men playing female characters. "Yes, quite often," Cleese replied. "In those days, it was common for comedy groups to have the men play all the parts, including women, though I have to say I was never particularly convincing as a woman." This revelation sparked a discussion about acting and the difference between playing a character and being yourself, concepts that the children found both fascinating and slightly confusing. "When you're being Basil," George asked, "do you feel angry like he does, or do you just pretend to be angry?" "I have to feel something real," Cleese explained, "but it's not the same anger Basil feels. I'm excited about making people laugh, so even when I'm acting angry, I'm actually quite happy inside." The afternoon included a tour of the family's private quarters, with the children proudly showing Cleese their favorite spaces and explaining their various interests and hobbies. Cleese was struck by how normal their lives seemed despite their extraordinary circumstances, and how their parents had worked to give them a sense of ordinary childhood experiences. When they returned to the sitting room for more tea, the conversation turned to the children's own creative interests. George mentioned his enjoyment of writing stories, while Charlotte talked about her love of performing and putting on shows for her family. "Have you ever tried writing comedy?" Cleese asked George, genuinely curious about the boy's creative ambitions. "A little," George admitted shyly. "I wrote a story about a dog who thinks he's a cat, but I'm not sure if it's actually funny." "The best way to find out is to read it to people and see if they laugh," Cleese advised. "And remember, if they don't laugh, it doesn't mean you're not funny. It might just mean that particular joke didn't work and you can try a different one." Charlotte volunteered that she had been practicing different voices and accents, inspired partly by watching Fawlty Towers, and noting how the various characters each had distinctive ways of speaking. "Would you like to show Mr. Cleese your Basil voice?" William suggested, knowing his daughter would relish the opportunity to perform. Charlotte needed no further encouragement. Standing up and adopting an exaggerated posture, she launched into a creditable imitation of Basil's frustrated exclamation. "Oh, I see. Yes, I see. Well, thank you so very much for that absolutely fascinating piece of information." Her delivery was remarkably good for an 8-year-old, capturing not just the words but the rhythm and attitude that made Basil's speeches memorable. The room erupted in applause, with Cleese leading the appreciation. "That was excellent, Charlotte," he said sincerely. "You've really captured his rhythm. Have you been practicing?" "Every day," she replied proudly. "Mummy says I sound just like him when I'm explaining why my room isn't as messy as it looks." This admission caused great hilarity among the adults, with Catherine confirming that Charlotte had indeed begun channeling Basil's verbose justifications in her daily life. As the visit drew to a close, it was clear that the afternoon had exceeded everyone's expectations. The children had not only met one of their comedy heroes, but had engaged with him as a real person, learning about creativity, character development, and the craft of making people laugh. "This has been absolutely wonderful," Cleese said as they prepared for his departure. "You have remarkable children, and it's clear they've inherited both your intelligence and your sense of humor." The children lined up to say goodbye, each offering their thanks in their own way. George presented Cleese with a hand-drawn picture of Basil looking frustrated, while Charlotte performed one more brief Basil impression. Louis simply offered a shy hug, which Cleese accepted with obvious pleasure. "I hope we can do this again sometime," William said as he walked Cleese to the door. "They'll be talking about this for months, and I suspect it may inspire even more questions about comedy and writing." "I'd be delighted to return anytime," Cleese replied. "It's been a genuine pleasure and, quite frankly, one of the most enjoyable conversations about my work I've had in years. Your children ask better questions than most professional interviewers." As Cleese departed, the Wales family gathered to discuss the afternoon's events. The children were bursting with excitement and new ideas, already planning ways to incorporate what they had learned into their own creative play. The visit had created exactly the kind of memory William and Catherine hoped to give their children, an experience that was both special and educational, allowing them to see that the people who create the entertainment they love are real individuals with their own stories and insights to share. In the weeks following John Cleese's visit to Kensington Palace, the impact of that afternoon conversation continued to ripple through the Wales family's daily life in unexpected ways. What had begun as a simple fan meeting had evolved into something more significant, a catalyst for the children's growing interest in comedy, creativity, and the art of storytelling. George had taken Cleese's advice about testing his comedy writing quite seriously. The 10-year-old had established what he called his joke laboratory in a corner of his room, complete with notebooks filled with his observations about what made things funny. His story about the confused dog had been expanded into a series of tales featuring animals with mistaken identities, each one carefully crafted to include the kind of character-based humor that Cleese had explained during their conversation. "Listen to this one, Papa," George announced one evening after dinner, settling into his favorite reading chair with his latest creation. "There once was a hamster named Herbert who was convinced he was actually a horse. Every morning he would try to gallop around his cage, but since hamster legs are quite short, he mostly just ran in very small, very fast circles. William listened with genuine attention as his eldest son read the tale, nodding how George had absorbed the lesson about comedy coming from character rather than random silliness. Herbert the hamster's delusions of grandeur clearly echoed Basil Fawlty's inflated self-image, but the story was entirely George's own creation. Herbert spent his days practicing what he thought were impressive horse behaviors, George continued, warming to his story. He would stand on his hind legs and whinny, though it came out as more of a squeak. He refused to eat regular hamster food, insisting that a proper horse should only eat hay, even though the hay was bigger than he was. Charlotte, who had become George's most reliable audience, giggled appreciatively at this detail. She had developed her own post-Cleese creative pursuits, establishing elaborate theatrical performances featuring characters with distinct personalities and speech patterns. Her bedroom had been transformed into a costume workshop where she created outfits and props for her various characters. The other hamsters thought Herbert was quite silly, George read on, but they were too polite to say so directly. Instead, they would whisper among themselves about their peculiar friend who insisted on sleeping standing up, which never worked out well since hamsters are not particularly good at maintaining their balance while unconscious. The story continued for several more pages, following Herbert through various misadventures as he attempted to live as a horse in a hamster's body. The humor was gentle and character-driven, showing remarkable sophistication for someone George's age. More importantly, it demonstrated that he had understood the fundamental principle Cleese had shared. Funny situations arise naturally from well-defined character traits. Catherine had been observing her children's creative development with interest and pride. The visit from Cleese had not only provided them with a memorable experience, but had also given them tools for understanding and creating humor. She had noticed that their appreciation of comedy had become more analytical and thoughtful, extending beyond simple enjoyment to genuine understanding of craft and technique. "George, that was wonderful," William said when his son finished reading. "Herbert is a very believable character, and his problems feel real even though the situation is completely absurd." "That's what Mr. Cleese said was important," George replied seriously. "He said the character has to make sense to himself, even if he doesn't make sense to anyone else." Charlotte, not to be outdone, had prepared her own presentation for the family. She had been working on a character she called Lady Prudence Particulars, a highly refined woman who had very strong opinions about proper behavior, but was herself quite clumsy and accident-prone. "May I present my latest theatrical creation?" Charlotte announced with the dramatic flair that had become her signature. She disappeared briefly and returned wearing an elaborate hat constructed from cardboard and decorated with paper flowers, along with a flowing scarf that had clearly been borrowed from her mother's wardrobe. "Good evening," she said in an exaggeratedly posh accent that bore a slight resemblance to Sybil Fawlty, but was distinctly Charlotte's own creation. "I am Lady Prudence Particulars, and I am here to instruct you in the proper way to behave in polite society." Her performance included detailed explanations of imaginary etiquette rules, delivered with complete seriousness despite their obvious absurdity. "One must never sneeze while facing north on a Tuesday," Lady Prudence declared, "as this disturbs the natural harmony of the atmospheric conditions and may cause confusion among migrating butterflies." As she continued her lecture, Lady Prudence became increasingly entangled in her scarf, knocked over an imaginary teacup, and generally proved herself to be the worst possible example of the refined behavior she was promoting. The irony was deliberate and well executed, showing that Charlotte had grasped the concept of characters who embody the opposite of what they claim to represent. Louis, despite being the youngest, had also been influenced by their visitors' insights about comedy. His contributions were simpler but no less creative. He had begun telling elaborate stories about his stuffed animals, giving each one a distinct personality and creating scenarios where their different traits led to humorous conflicts. "Mr. Elephant thinks he's the smartest," Louis explained to anyone who would listen. "But he keeps forgetting that his trunk is attached to his face, so when he tries to be fancy and bow, he steps on his own nose." The image was simple but effective, and Louis's delivery, complete with sound effects and physical demonstrations, showed that he had an intuitive understanding of physical comedy even if he couldn't yet articulate the principles behind it. William and Catherine found themselves becoming active participants in their children's comedy education. They had begun watching classic British comedies together as a family, using each viewing as an opportunity to discuss character development, timing, and the different types of humor that appealed to different people. Their next selection had been Some Mothers Do Ave M, which proved to be another hit with the children. George was fascinated by Frank Spencer's well-meaning incompetence, while Charlotte delighted in the elaborate chain reactions that resulted from simple mistakes. Louis simply enjoyed the physical comedy, laughing uproariously at Frank's various mishaps without needing to understand the underlying social commentary. "It's like Basil Fawlty, but different," George observed after their first episode. "Frank Spencer isn't trying to impress anyone, he's just trying to help, but everything goes wrong anyway." "That's a very good observation," William replied. "Both characters create chaos, but their motivations are completely different, which changes how we feel about them." Catherine added, "Frank is much more sympathetic because his intentions are good, even though his methods are disastrous." These conversations had become a regular part of their family routine, creating shared references and inside jokes that brought them closer together. The children had begun incorporating elements from various comedy shows into their daily interactions, creating a rich tapestry of humor that was uniquely their own. The influence of their comedy education extended beyond entertainment into their approach to problem-solving and social situations. George had begun using humor to diffuse tension with his siblings, while Charlotte had discovered that making people laugh was an effective way to make new friends. Even Louis had learned that funny voices and silly faces could turn a difficult moment into a game. One evening, as the family was settling in for their weekly comedy viewing, Charlotte made an announcement that surprised her parents. "I've been thinking about what Mr. Cleese said about comedy helping people feel better about their own problems," she said with unusual seriousness. "I think that's why I like performing so much. When I make people laugh, they seem happier, and that makes me happy too." It was a remarkably mature observation from an 8-year-old, showing that she had understood something profound about the social function of humor. Comedy wasn't just about entertainment. It was about creating connections and providing comfort through shared laughter. George nodded in agreement. "And writing funny stories helps me understand people better. When I'm trying to figure out why Herbert the hamster would think he's a horse, I have to think about what kinds of things make people believe silly things about themselves." William exchanged a meaningful look with Catherine. Their children were developing not just an appreciation for comedy, but genuine insights into human nature and social dynamics. The visit from John Cleese had planted seeds that were growing in directions they hadn't anticipated. "You're both absolutely right," Catherine said warmly. "Comedy can be a way of understanding the world and connecting with other people. It's one of the things that makes us uniquely human." Louis, who had been listening with the concentration of someone trying to understand concepts just beyond his reach, suddenly spoke up. "So laughing together makes people friends." "Often, yes," William confirmed. "When people laugh together, they share a moment of joy and understanding. It creates a bond between them." This conversation had prompted William to reflect on his own relationship with humor and its role in his public life. As someone who would one day be king, he understood the importance of being able to connect with people from all walks of life, and he was beginning to see how his children's comedy education might serve them well in their future roles. The following week brought an unexpected opportunity to test these developing skills. The family was attending a public engagement where they would meet children from various local schools. As they prepared for the event, William suggested that they might find ways to incorporate humor into their interactions, making the children they met feel more comfortable and creating positive memories. "Remember what we've learned about character and timing," he advised his children. "The goal isn't to perform for people, but to find natural moments where a little humor can make everyone feel more relaxed and happy." George had prepared a few gentle jokes appropriate for meeting new children, while Charlotte had practiced some amusing voices that might entertain younger kids without being overwhelming. Louis had been coached on using his natural expressiveness to make people smile without requiring them to understand complex humor. The event proved to be an excellent laboratory for their developing comedy skills. George discovered that asking other children about their own favorite jokes was an effective way to start conversations, while Charlotte found that her character voices were particularly popular with the younger attendees. Louis simply charmed everyone with his enthusiastic reactions and infectious giggles. What impressed William and Catherine most was how naturally their children had integrated humor into their social interactions. They weren't performing or showing off. They were using comedy as a tool for making genuine connections with their peers. After the event, as they discussed the day's experiences, Charlotte made another insightful observation. It's different when you use humor to make friends than when you use it to show off. When you're trying to make friends, you pay attention to what makes other people laugh, not just what you think is funny. This distinction between performative and connective humor demonstrated a level of emotional intelligence that pleased both parents enormously. Their children were learning to be funny in service of others, not just for their own entertainment or ego gratification. As they drove home that evening, William reflected on how a simple conversation at a charity gala had led to such profound developments in his children's understanding of humor, creativity, and social connection. John Cleese's willingness to share his insights about comedy had given his family tools they would use for the rest of their lives. The experience had also reinforced William's belief in the importance of exposing his children to people from different backgrounds and professions. Meeting someone like Cleese had shown them that creativity and humor were valuable skills that could enrich their lives and help them serve others more effectively. Most importantly, the ongoing comedy education had brought the family closer together, creating shared experiences and reference points that would remain part of their family culture for years to come. What had begun as entertainment had become education, and what had started as education had deepened into genuine understanding of human nature and social dynamics. 6 months after John Cleese's memorable visit to Kensington Palace, the friendship between the comedy legend and the Wales family had evolved into something neither party had anticipated. What had begun as a brief encounter at a charity gala had developed into a genuine relationship that enriched both sides in unexpected ways. The transformation had been gradual but profound. Cleese found himself genuinely invested in the children's creative development, while William and Catherine discovered that having a friend outside the traditional royal circle provided valuable perspective and refreshing honesty. The children, meanwhile, had gained not just a comedy mentor, but a wise and witty uncle figure who took their artistic endeavors seriously. The regular correspondence that had developed between them had become one of the highlights of Cleese's week. George's letters, written in his careful handwriting, contained detailed reports on his latest story creations and thoughtful questions about the craft of writing. Charlotte's communications were more theatrical, often including sketches of her costume designs and transcripts of dialogue she had created for her various characters. Even Louis contributed, though his letters consisted mainly of drawings with brief explanations dictated to his parents. "Dear Mr. Cleese," George's most recent letter had begun, "I have been experimenting with what you called escalating absurdity in my Herbert the Hamster stories. In my latest tale, Herbert decides he needs to train for the Kentucky Derby and convinces the other hamsters to help him practice jumping over increasingly large obstacles, starting with sunflower seeds and working up to entire blocks of cheese." The letter went on to describe Herbert's elaborate training regimen, complete with a detailed schedule and nutrition plan that was completely inappropriate for a hamster, but perfectly logical from Herbert's horse-obsessed perspective. George had clearly grasped the concept of taking a character's delusions to their natural extreme, creating humor through the persistence of obviously flawed logic. "The funniest part," George continued, "is when Herbert tries to explain racing strategy to his girlfriend, Henrietta, who is a perfectly sensible hamster and cannot understand why anyone would want to run in circles when there's perfectly good food available in the corner of the cage. Their conversations about training philosophy have become quite philosophical." Cleese had been delighted by this development. The boy was learning to create humor through character interaction and dialogue, showing an understanding of comedic principles that many adult writers struggled to master. More importantly, George was developing his own voice while applying the techniques they had discussed. Charlotte's latest theatrical venture had been even more ambitious. She had created an entire repertory company of characters and had begun writing short plays featuring their interactions. Her most successful creation was a series about the Magnificent Mildred, a stage magician whose tricks never worked as intended, but who maintained complete confidence in her abilities despite mounting evidence to the contrary. Mildred insists that magic is all about presentation and attitude, Charlotte had explained in her latest letter. So when her rabbit from the hat trick produces a confused chicken instead, she simply announces that she has invented a new and improved version of the classic trick. The chicken seems quite pleased with the attention, so everyone assumes this was intentional. The character showed Charlotte's growing sophistication in understanding how comedy could arise from characters who refuse to acknowledge obvious problems. Mildred's unshakable confidence in the face of constant failure was reminiscent of Basil Fawlty's refusal to admit his own incompetence, but Charlotte had made the character entirely her own. Louis's contributions were simpler but no less creative. His latest artistic project involved a series of drawings depicting the adventures of Captain Sock, a superhero whose powers were entirely related to laundry. Captain Sock could detect dirty clothing from great distances and had the ability to sort colors with superhuman accuracy, but was completely useless in traditional superhero situations. Captain Sock tries to stop a bank robbery by offering to wash the robbers' masks, Louis had explained to Cleese during their most recent phone conversation. But the robbers are too busy to appreciate proper fabric care, so Captain Sock has to call for backup from regular police, who are much better at catching criminals. The innocent humor of Louis's stories masked a sophisticated understanding of absurdity and anti-heroic comedy. His instinctive grasp of how to subvert expectations showed that comedy appreciation was developing naturally across all three children, each finding their own style and voice. Cleese had been so impressed with the children's progress that he had begun sharing their work with colleagues in the entertainment industry. The consensus was remarkable. These young people were developing genuine comedic sensibilities that went far beyond simple mimicry or juvenile humor. "I've been in this business for over 50 years, Cleese had told William during one of their increasingly frequent conversations, "and I can honestly say that your children show more natural understanding of comedy principles than many professional writers I've worked with. They're not just funny, they're learning to think funny." This assessment had led to an unexpected proposition. Cleese had been invited to participate in a special comedy workshop for young people, organized by a prestigious performing arts foundation. The workshop was designed to encourage creative writing and performance skills among children aged 8 to 14, and Cleese had immediately thought of the Wales children as potential participants. It would be an opportunity for them to work with other young people who share their interests, Cleese had explained to William and Catherine during a private dinner at the palace. Sometimes the best learning happens when children can bounce ideas off peers who are equally passionate about the same subjects. The suggestion had required careful consideration. While William and Catherine were always looking for opportunities to give their children experiences similar to those available to other young people, any public participation required balancing educational benefits against security concerns and media attention. After extensive discussions with palace security and the foundation organizers, arrangements were made for the children to participate in a private session of the workshop, held at a secure location with carefully vetted participants. The other young attendees were children of diplomats, artists, and other public figures who understood the need for discretion and privacy. The workshop itself exceeded all expectations. George found himself working with a 12-year-old girl whose specialty was writing comedy sketches about historical figures in modern situations. Their collaboration resulted in a piece about Julius Caesar trying to order takeaway food, with Caesar becoming increasingly frustrated by the concept of delivery apps and modern payment methods. "I conquered Gaul," their Caesar declared indignantly, "but I cannot conquer this infernal device that claims to know my location but refuses to accept denarii as payment." The sketch successfully combined historical knowledge with contemporary observations, creating humor that was both educational and entertaining. George's contribution focused on Caesar's character development, while his partner provided the historical context and modern technology expertise. Charlotte's workshop experience was equally successful. She had been paired with a boy her age whose family background was in theatrical design, and together they created an elaborate puppet show featuring the incompetent fairy godmother, whose magic spells consistently produced unexpected results. "Instead of turning a pumpkin into a carriage," Charlotte explained to her rapt audience of fellow workshop participants, She accidentally creates a very confused orange that believes it should be providing transportation services, but lacks the necessary wheels, doors, or ability to move. The puppet show required Charlotte to develop new skills in manipulation and voice work while maintaining her character development abilities. Her partner contributed technical expertise in puppet construction and staging, creating a successful collaborative effort that impressed both instructors and peers. Louis, being the youngest participant, worked with a group of children his age in a simplified version of the workshop focused on physical comedy and character movement. His natural expressiveness and enthusiasm made him popular with both instructors and fellow participants, and he proved adept at the kind of visual humor that required no sophisticated verbal skills. Louis has an instinctive understanding of timing, one of the instructors told Catherine at the end of the session. He knows exactly how long to hold a pose or expression for maximum comedic effect, which is a skill that usually takes years to develop. The workshop experience provided more than just comedy education. It gave the children a chance to see how they're developing skills compared to those of their peers, and to learn from young people with different backgrounds and perspectives. Perhaps most importantly, it demonstrated that their interest in comedy was not just a passing phase, but a genuine passion that could potentially develop into a lifelong pursuit, whether professionally or as an enriching hobby. The success of the workshop led to an invitation for the children to participate in a special performance for charity, featuring young comedians and performers from across the United Kingdom. The event would be held at a prestigious venue and would raise funds for children's literacy programs, combining their artistic interests with charitable work. It would give them a chance to perform for a real audience, Cleese explained, while supporting a cause that aligns with your family's charitable interests. The other performers are all young people who have demonstrated exceptional talent and commitment to comedy and performance. The charity performance represented a significant step forward in the children's development as young artists. It would be their first opportunity to present their work to an audience beyond family and close friends, providing valuable experience in dealing with performance pressure and public reception of their creative efforts. William and Catherine recognized that the performance would also serve as a test of their children's readiness to handle public attention for their artistic work, separate from their roles as members of the royal family. If they handled the experience well, it might open doors to future opportunities for artistic development and public service. The preparation for the performance became a family project, with each child developing pieces that showcased their individual strengths while contributing to a cohesive overall presentation. George worked on a storytelling segment featuring Herbert the hamster's latest adventure. Charlotte prepared a character performance featuring Lady Prudence particulars, and Louis developed a physical comedy routine with Captain Sock. Cleese served as an informal consultant throughout the preparation process, offering advice on timing, audience engagement, and performance anxiety. His experience with live audiences proved invaluable in helping the children understand how to adapt their material for public presentation. The most important thing, he told them during one of their preparation sessions, is to remember that the audience wants you to succeed. They're not there hopping you'll fail, they're there hopping you'll make them laugh and feel good. If you focus on giving them joy rather than worrying about making mistakes, you'll do wonderfully. This perspective helped calm the children's pre-performance nerves and reminded them that their goal was to share the pleasure they found in comedy rather than to prove their worthiness as performers. As the performance date approached, the children's excitement began to outweigh their anxiety. They had discovered not only that they enjoyed creating comedy, but that they were genuinely good at it, capable of entertaining and connecting with audiences through their unique perspective on humor. The journey from watching Fawlty Towers as a family entertainment to preparing for a public performance had been remarkably swift, but it reflected the children's natural aptitude and the quality of mentorship they had received. John Cleese's willingness to share his knowledge and experience had accelerated their development far beyond what might have been expected from such young performers. More importantly, the experience had given them confidence in their creative abilities and taught them valuable lessons about collaboration, practice, and the importance of bringing joy to others through artistic expression. These lessons would serve them well regardless of what paths their lives ultimately took, providing them with skills and perspectives that would enrich their personal and professional relationships for years to come. The charity performance evening arrived with all the anticipation and nervous energy that accompanies any significant milestone. The venue, a beautifully restored Victorian theatre in central London, provided an intimate setting that felt both grand enough to be special and small enough to feel personal. The audience would consist primarily of supporters of children's literacy programs, fellow performers' families, and invited guests who understood they were witnessing something unique. Backstage, the atmosphere buzzed with the controlled chaos typical of any live performance. Young performers from across the country were making final preparations, running through last-minute rehearsals, and supporting each other with the camaraderie that develops naturally among artists sharing a common goal. George, Charlotte, and Louis had arrived early with their parents and John Cleese, who had volunteered to serve as their unofficial backstage mentor for the evening. The children's nervousness was evident but manageable, tempered by excitement and the confidence that came from thorough preparation. "Remember," Cleese told them as they gathered in a quiet corner of the backstage area, "you've already succeeded simply by being here and sharing your talents. Everything else is just extra joy for the audience." George, dressed neatly in a simple sweater and trousers that would help him embody Herbert the hamster's earnest personality, was reviewing his storytelling notes one final time. His performance piece had evolved into a sophisticated narrative that combined character voices, physical gestures, and audience interaction to bring Herbert's latest adventure to life. "I keep thinking about what you said about making the audience partners in the story," George said to Cleese. "I've practiced asking them questions that will help them understand Herbert's logic, even when it's completely wrong." Charlotte, resplendent in a costume that combined elements of Lady Prudence particulars with her own theatrical flair, was running through vocal exercises to prepare for her character work. Her piece had developed into a comic lecture about proper behavior that would demonstrate Lady Prudence's expertise while revealing her complete lack of practical knowledge. "The best part," Charlotte explained to her brothers, "is that by the end, the audience will realize they know much more about real manners than Lady Prudence does, which should make them feel clever and happy." Louis, wearing a simple costume that would allow him maximum freedom of movement for his Captain Sock routine, was bouncing with excitement rather than nervousness. His natural enthusiasm had proven to be his greatest asset, and he had learned to channel it into performances that were both energetic and controlled. "Are you ready to save the day through proper laundry techniques?" William asked his youngest son with a grin. "Captain Sock is always ready," Louis replied with complete seriousness, already beginning to embody his heroic character. As the evening progressed and other acts took the stage, the Wales children watched from the wings, observing their fellow young performers and nodding different approaches to comedy and audience engagement. Each act brought something unique: musical comedy, sketch performance, stand-up routines adapted for young performers, and even some magic with comedic twists. "Look how differently everyone approaches making people laugh," Charlotte observed quietly. "Some use music, some use props, some just use their voices and expressions. But they all make the audience feel good," George added, demonstrating his growing understanding of comedy's fundamental purpose. When their turn arrived, the children took the stage with remarkable composure. George opened their segment with Herbert the hamster's latest adventure, a tale involving Herbert's decision to become a racing coach for other small animals who clearly had no interest in competitive running. Herbert had spent considerable time studying what he believed to be advanced equine training techniques, George began, his voice taking on Herbert's earnest tone, which mostly involved reading discarded racing magazines and watching through the cage bars as real horses appeared on television during sporting events. The audience was immediately drawn into Herbert's world, charmed by George's sincere portrayal of the delusional but well-meaning hamster. As the story progressed, George involved the audience in Herbert's decision-making process, asking them questions that revealed the logical flaws in Herbert's reasoning while maintaining sympathy for the character. Now Herbert needed to decide which of his friends would make the best racing students, George continued, looking out at the audience. Should he choose Gerald the guinea pig, who was known for his steady temperament but preferred sleeping to running? Or perhaps Beatrice the budgie, who was certainly fast but insisted on flying rather than keeping her feet on the ground? The audience's responses helped drive the story forward, creating the kind of interactive experience that Cleese had suggested would make the performance feel collaborative rather than simply presentational. By the time George reached Herbert's inevitable realization that perhaps not everyone was cut out for professional racing, the audience was fully invested in the character's journey. Charlotte's performance as Lady Prudence particulars built perfectly on the foundation George had established. Her character's elaborate explanations of social etiquette provided a completely different type of humor while maintaining the evening's theme of lovable, misguided characters pursuing impossible goals. "Good evening, distinguished ladies and gentlemen," Charlotte began in Lady Prudence's grandest manner. "I am here tonight to share with you the most essential rules of proper deportment as practiced by the finest members of society." What followed was a masterclass in character comedy, as Lady Prudence proceeded to demonstrate rules that were either completely invented or so impractical as to be impossible. Her insistence that one should never sit down while wearing shoes on a Wednesday, combined with her own inability to follow her own elaborate guidelines, created exactly the kind of ironic humor that appealed to both children and adults in the audience. "Of course, the most important rule of all," Lady Prudence declared while becoming increasingly entangled in her own scarf, "is that one must always maintain perfect composure regardless of circumstances. A true lady never acknowledges minor inconveniences such as, oh dear, becoming accidentally attached to the furniture." Louis's Captain Sock routine provided the perfect energetic finale to their segment. His physical comedy and infectious enthusiasm brought the audience to their feet, as Captain Sock attempted to solve increasingly absurd problems through the application of laundry-related superpowers. "Fear not, citizens," Louis declared in his best superhero voice, striking a dramatic pose. "Captain Sock will save the day by ensuring that all evildoers have properly sorted their colors before attempting any villainous activities." His routine included elaborate demonstrations of sock-folding techniques, dramatic battles against static electricity, and a climactic scene where Captain Sock defeated his nemesis, the dreaded lint monster, through superior fabric care knowledge. The audience's response exceeded all expectations. The combination of George's storytelling, Charlotte's character work, and Louis's physical comedy had created a cohesive and thoroughly entertaining segment that showcased each child's individual strengths while demonstrating their shared understanding of comedic principles. As they took their bows, the children could see their parents and John Cleese standing in the wings, beaming with pride. The applause was genuine and enthusiastic, the kind of reception that validated all their hard work and encouraged future creative endeavors. "Ladies and gentlemen," the evening's host announced as the children prepared to leave the stage, "these remarkable young performers have just demonstrated that the future of British comedy is in very capable hands indeed." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations, meetings with other performers, and conversations with audience members who wanted to express their appreciation for the children's work. Several professional comedians and writers in attendance made a point of speaking with George, Charlotte, and Louis, offering encouragement and expressing genuine admiration for their developing talents. "What impressed me most," one veteran comedian told William and Catherine, "is how naturally they connected with the audience. They weren't just performing at people, they were sharing joy with them. That's a quality that can't really be taught." John Cleese, who had watched the performance from the back of the theater to get the full audience perspective, was effusive in his praise when the family gathered backstage afterward. "That was absolutely wonderful," he told the children sincerely. "You've taken everything we've discussed about character and timing and audience engagement, and you've made it completely your own. Herbert, Lady Prudence, and Captain Sock are now real characters with their own lives and personalities." For George, Charlotte, and Louis, the evening represented more than just a successful performance. It was confirmation that their passion for comedy could become a lasting part of their lives, whether as a hobby that brought joy to others or as a more serious artistic pursuit. "I think," George said thoughtfully as they prepared to leave the theater, "I understand now what you meant about comedy being a way to connect with people. Tonight felt like we were all laughing together, not just them laughing at us." Charlotte nodded in agreement, and it felt like we were giving them something valuable, not just showing off what we could do. Louis, still energized from his performance, added his own observation. Captain Sock made people happy, and that made me happy, and I think that's the best kind of circle. The drive home was filled with animated discussion about the evening's events, other performers they had met, and ideas for future creative projects. The children were already planning new adventures for their characters and discussing possibilities for future performances. William and Catherine exchanged glances in the front seat, both thinking about how much their children had grown since that initial evening of watching Fawlty Towers together. What had begun as simple family entertainment had evolved into genuine artistic development, and perhaps more importantly, had taught their children valuable lessons about bringing joy to others through creative expression. "I think," Catherine said quietly to William, "this is one of those experiences they'll remember for the rest of their lives." "And it all started with John mentioning that his children enjoyed his work," William replied with a smile. "It's amazing how a simple conversation can lead to such meaningful developments." In the months that followed, the children's performance became something of a talking point in entertainment circles, not because of their royal connections, but because of the genuine quality of their work. They received invitations to participate in other charitable events, opportunities to work with professional comedy writers, and offers to attend specialized workshops and masterclasses. More importantly, their success had given them confidence in their creative abilities and shown them that artistic expression could be a powerful tool for connecting with others and making positive contributions to their community. John Cleese's relationship with the family had deepened beyond mentorship into genuine friendship. His willingness to share his knowledge and experience had not only accelerated the children's development, but it also provided him with the satisfaction of seeing his life's work inspire a new generation of comedy creators. "You know," Cleese told William during one of their regular conversations, "when I first started in comedy, I never imagined that one day I'd be helping the future king's children develop their comedic sensibilities. But it's been one of the most rewarding experiences of my career." The story of Prince William's children discovering John Cleese's work, and the friendship that developed from that initial connection, had become a testament to the power of shared laughter to bridge differences and create meaningful relationships. It demonstrated that creativity and humor were universal languages that could bring people together regardless of their backgrounds or circumstances. Most importantly, it had shown three young people that they possessed the ability to bring joy to others through their creativity, a lesson that would serve them well in whatever roles life might ask them to play in the years ahead. Whether they pursued careers in the arts or followed more traditional royal paths, they would carry with them the understanding that laughter was one of the most valuable gifts they could offer to the world.